Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is my review of the second episode of Season 3 of Star Trek Picard called Disengage. And in my personal opinion, this was much worse than the previous episode and it really gets me worried. I was hoping that this season will indeed be better because so many people claim to have seen this new season and that it's a totally different show from the previous two seasons. And so far, unfortunately, I have too many examples and I have a few pages of them of things that just don't make sense in the writing. A lot of it feels just like filler. In this whole new episode, we don't get any new information at all about the bigger plot or the motivation of the villains or really any of it. Like by the end of this episode, we're basically at exactly the same point like in the end of the previous episode. We don't really know anything new at all. The only thing that happened is that they moved from Beverly's ship to the Titan and that we have a confirmation that this new guy is actually Picard's son, which also is a bit disappointing because I kind of half expected, I didn't really believe they will do that, but I did expect maybe there will be some kind of a surprise twist or maybe there's something special about him, and it is still a mystery. Why are the bad guys chasing him? Like, what's so important about him that they want him so badly and they want him alive for some reason, because they had plenty of opportunities to simply blow him up in space and they want him alive for some reason, and it cannot possibly because of all this humanitarian work he did and all of that, because he says that Beverly was alongside him all that time. So how come they don't want Beverly as well? Why do they only want him? So I thought maybe they will surprise us with some clever twist or some science fiction idea, like there was that theory that he's actually a clone of Jack Crusher or something like that, which at least will be an interesting science fiction idea and will create all kinds of interesting situations. But they went with the obvious soap opera stuff that he's just Picard's son, and in some ways it is satisfying because, Picard always cried about him being the last Picard and all of that, not having a legacy, and since he's a robot now, then he cannot make new children, I guess, and so by saying that he does have a child that does give him a legacy, and also doing it with Beverly, who a lot of people were shipping for them back in TNG because they were always hinting that they might hook up together and never did, and so now they revealed that they did at some point and did have a kid, so it is kind of satisfying for those people who were shipping them and all of that, so I get all of that. But it's basically the same plot as we saw in one episode of TNG when Picard thought he had a kid and then discovered that his kid was a criminal, doing shady stuff on some planet. So I don't see anything new or original in this whole show. That's the problem also. You know how when I was reviewing Star Trek Discovery, I was constantly complaining how they're constantly ripping off other movies and shows and not doing anything new at all? Well, at least this show is ripping off the old Star Trek movies. So maybe it makes this season feel more like Star Trek, but we still have the problem of it not being original, no creativity. They're basically remaking the old TOS movies. Like now we have this whole situation of going into battle with this crazy villain lady, and they're outgunned and they're going to hide in a nebula, so just like in the Wrath of Khan, and Picard meets his son that he didn't know about it, just like Kirk met a son he didn't know about. And I'm guessing by episode 4 they will have to go back in time to save some dolphins to bring them to the future so that they can help them navigate better in space or something to save the day. And then in episode 5 they'll discover that Riker had a secret half-betazoid brother who no one knew about, who wants to take them into the center of the galaxy. Like, you get what I'm saying? That every episode will be some kind of remake of an older Star Trek movie. That will be ridiculous, right? So that's what I'm feeling with this show, that they don't really do anything new. They're just recycling, Star Trek's greatest hits. Where is the new story? Where are the new ideas? That's what I'm missing. Maybe it will happen later in the season, I hope so. But so far, it feels like the show is dragging. There is no new information at all. There were a lot of scenes that didn't really make much sense, but I was hoping maybe they will explain it later. Like, why did Crusher tell Picard not to trust anyone in Starfleet and so on? So to me, it kind of immediately brought back memories of that old episode Conspiracy. So I thought maybe they're bringing back that old storyline. I personally wouldn't mind, because I never liked the fact they left that cliffhanger hanging and never resolving it. So I personally would love a continuation if it's done well. But now I think it's probably not going to happen. All the supposed clues we had them in the whole video was basically debunked by this episode. The fact that the enemy ship even kind of looks like those bugs. It has the same kind of pincer at the front like those bugs did and all of that, but now it's basically out the window, so I no longer think that's going to be the case, and probably never going to get explained. Why did Beverly say not to trust Starfleet? I guess we'll never know. It's just her paranoia, I guess. And when they first show us the new villain, the first thing she says to them is, "Good afternoon." Now, by itself, I can be fine with it. It's not a problem. I guess it's afternoon on her ship, and so she says good afternoon. She's very polite. That's fine. But then she tries to explain that line by saying, "I'm pretty sure it's afternoon in the Sol system." And that's probably the single stupidest line in the whole show so far. Now, maybe it's intended to be a joke, maybe she's not being serious, but I'm not so sure the writers intended it as that. Maybe they're being serious. And why do the bad guys even want Jack Crusher? Is it just because of his humanitarian work or his freedom fighting and all of that? If that's the case, and there's a scene of him saying that Beverly was alongside him, doing all of those things together, equal partners and all of that. So how come the bad guys don't want Beverly as well? How come they only want him personally? And for what? Obviously they want him alive because they had plenty of opportunities in this episode to simply blow him up, and yet they don't, and so that means they want him alive for some reason. So why? It's never explained. He himself doesn't know why. And also a lot of details just don't add up mathematically. Like he said in the previous episode that they were on the run for months, that for many months lots of groups of different people were chasing him, and yet this episode begins with a flashback to 2 weeks earlier. And that's when he first meets the Fenris Rangers and all of that, which he said in the previous episode, that's how it started. He said that was the first group that tried to capture him, and then later Klingons and other groups. So that was only 2 weeks ago, we find out now. So why did he say that they were running for months? Like, it doesn't add up. And the same thing with, his age being older than what it's supposed to be, because they said that Beverly disappeared 20 years ago, so he's supposed to be 20 years old or even 19 years old. And yet the actor is much older, and I do think it's kind of noticeable that he looks like a 40-year-old man and not a 20-year-old. And there's a scene of Riker telling him, "Do the math, Jean-Luc," and all of that. And also there's a scene of Captain Shaw not even sure if he's telling the truth, not trusting him, and saying, "How do you even know it's Beverly's child?" And at that moment I thought, why don't we just scan him and compare the DNA? They had Dr. Crusher in sickbay by that point, so why not simply scan his DNA? I'm guessing you cannot scan Picard's DNA anymore because he doesn't have any since he's a robot now, but you can still check if it's Beverly's son because Beverly is in their sickbay at that point. So all kinds of moments like that which don't make sense. So for example, when that Fenris Ranger guy showed up, you see that his face is kind of scarred and all of that, and Jack is trying to deliver medical supplies to them and talking about some fever on the planet, and so I assume the guy on the screen must have that fever also because he has the strange face, so he looks kind of sick. So I thought, oh, so he must be sick as well. And then he comes aboard the ship, and Jack is not worried about getting infected. So I guess the facial scars are just from something else. It has nothing to do with actual fever. So why create this unnecessary confusion for the viewer? And later on, when they beam them off that ship to the Titan, they also beam Beverly's pod to the ship, and yet they don't show it on the transporter pad. And only a few scenes later, they explain that they beamed Beverly directly to sickbay. But when you first watch that first scene of them beaming to the Titan without Beverly, you assume that Beverly must have stayed on that other ship, and then later you see it blow up and all of that. So you assume that Beverly must have died or was left in space or something, and only later you see, oh, that she is on the ship. And then how did she get there? And so it creates all this unnecessary confusion, which you can explain when you rewatch the episode, but it confuses you the first time you watch it. And these are issues that could have easily been fixed with just a little bit of better editing or better script writing. So all of this stuff is starting to really worry me. I'm starting getting really skeptical that this season will indeed be much better. And even visually, the whole atmosphere of the show, everything is too dark, even darker than the previous season, at least in season 1 of Picard, they were going to planets and everything was bright and all of that, so at least you can see something. Here everything is dark and nihilistic, and all the characters have facial scars, like that Fenris Ranger guy has that scar on his face, so why can't they fix it in the 25th century? And the villain lady has the scars and all of that, so... And they say that the Fenris Rangers are pirates, that they don't obey Federation laws and all of that, and yet in the beginning of the episode, the Fenris Rangers are demanding to see Jack's papers or something, and he says he doesn't deal with bureaucracy because he cares about saving people as quickly as possible. And they apparently are following protocols of the Federation. They want to see the paperwork, the bureaucracy, and that's why they come to inspect his ship, and then he bribes them with some Romulan ale and with some weapons which he gives them. So they are basically like pirates, so why were they pretending to serve the Federation in the beginning? So none of this really makes any sense if you try to analyze it. And then they also betray him. They send the signal to the marked woman, to the lady, to the crazy villain of the season, apparently, which she's like that sidekick of Dr. Evil. And apparently she wants Jack alive because she could easily have blown up the ship in the beginning of the episode when she fires a few torpedoes, which I guess she set on low yield, since they didn't have any shields and it creates very little damage. And then she tries to beam him out, and Picard put transporter inhibitors on the walls just in time, just in the last second. And I'm thinking, then why didn't they beam him out earlier, before Picard put the inhibitors? If the ship did not already have internal transporter inhibitors, then why were they trying to board the ship previously? Why didn't they beam Jack out before all of this, when Crusher locked him in a room? Did that room have transporter inhibitors? Like, they don't explain any of this stuff, and so if you actually analyze it in detail, then it doesn't make sense. And then later, when the Titan tries to beam them out, they forgot that they put the transport inhibitors, and Picard somehow has perfect aim, even though in the previous episode we saw him wearing glasses and he doesn't have any on now, and yet he can perfectly shoot and hit all these little devices on the walls. Another thing in that scene with the Rangers in the beginning, they say, send a transmission to the marked woman, we found him, and all of that. If they already knew there's a bounty on him, why didn't they catch him right away? They were just there on his ship, facing him, taking his supplies already, so there's nothing more to bribe them with. So if they're so dishonorable, then why didn't they simply arrest him right away and give him directly to that woman right away? What's the point of leaving the ship and then sending a transmission to her? And then she supposedly chased him for months, which somehow those months happened in 2 weeks. I guess maybe he was close to a black hole or something, and that create time dilation, and so for him it was a few months, while for everyone else it was 2 weeks. I guess I can come up with excuses by using convoluted science fiction excuses to try to explain the bad dialogue and the inconsistency, but why should I? Why doesn't the show pay attention to its own details? And one of the ensigns says, I'm reading photonic activity. And back in Voyager, they always use that term when talking about holograms, the sentient holograms. They were referred to as photonic life forms and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, does that have anything to do with it? Probably not. Probably someone just thought photonic sounds cool, and it's not about holograms, so I don't think that's the case. So anyway, the evil ship fires a few torpedoes and blows up their shuttle, and we see a piece of the shuttle flying toward the screen, and apparently the shuttle's name was Savik, so that's a member berry to the TOS movies once again. And why would they name a shuttle after a traitor Vulcan who betrayed them in Star Trek 6? I guess maybe it's some other Vulcan by that name who they named the shuttle after. So again, kind of pointless in my opinion. So this huge ship can easily blow them up and kill them. So if they just want Jack dead, then they could have killed him by now. And later in the episode, Riker says to show that giving Jack over to the evil ship is pure execution, it's a guillotine and all of that, but obviously they could have killed him already, so that's not what they want. Or maybe they want to torture him first, I don't know. It's never explained why exactly do they want him. Will it ever be explained? Beverly was right alongside him, according to him, in all his adventures, and so how come they don't want Beverly as well? Do they not know that Beverly was involved? And then we see that Rafi is still on Coruscant, and she's sad that she wasn't able to stop the terrorist attack from the previous episode, and her handler is telling her not to blame herself. And according to the Federation news, it was some Romulan rebel leader called Tuco or Taluco, something like that, who did it. And Rafi doesn't buy it. She thinks it's a cover story, that Starfleet is putting a blind eye to what's really going on. And Rafi finds out that that Romulan was working with some Ferengi crime lord named Sneed, and her handler tells her to disengage, so that's the title of the episode. And Rafi thinks that Sneed knows who really committed the terrorist attack, so she's going to go to him to find out. And her plan makes absolutely no sense, of course, because she goes there against orders, alone, without any backup, without any actual plan how she will get the information out of him, and it's by pure luck that any of it works at all. And that's how everything is in the show, that no one plans anything cleverly, everything just happens to work out perfectly by pure chance and by pure miracle. Another example is, Beverly sent the transmission to Picard, to his old comm badge, and from her point of view, maybe she didn't even know he has a synthetic body now, so from all she knew, she's sending it to a 100-year-old man with Iromodic syndrome, And from all the people in the galaxy, that's the guy she tries to contact, and we don't have any information that they try to contact anyone else. And also she added extra confusion for him when she encrypted the message with information that he wouldn't know about. And another contradiction later in the episode when Shaw says that they cannot contact Starfleet. He says the nebula is interrupting the transmission and they cannot send a call for help to Starfleet. Then how did Beverly send the transmission to Picard? They were still in that nebula when she did it. So she was able to send an obscure transmission, very specific one, to some old ancient comm badge from the Enterprise D. That was possible, but to contact Starfleet officially, when you're on a big Starfleet ship, that is somehow impossible. You cannot send the transmission to Starfleet because of the nebula, but Beverly could send the transmission to an old comm badge back on Earth in the middle of the Federation. So none of this makes any sense, I'm sorry. So this is bad writing, in my opinion. Also, he says help is days away. How can it be days away when you arrive there in one day? Now, if they said earlier that the Titan is the fastest ship in the fleet, something like that, that it has experimental engines, that's how it was able to get there so quickly, then maybe it could make sense, but they never said that. So how come they were able to get there in half a day when he was sleeping, and yet he says help is days away? When they came there from the middle of the Federation, are you telling me there are no other ships which are closer to the border? When you came there from Earth in half a day, and yet help is days away from other ships. So I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. And similarly, Rafi's plan makes no sense. So she disobeys orders again and goes on a solo mission to talk with this Ferengi without any actual plan of how she will able to get any information out of him. And in the end, she didn't get any information from him. So all of this scene with the Ferengi was totally pointless if you think about it. I mean, it's nice to see a Ferengi who actually looks like a Ferengi again. I did think his ears looked a little bit too small. At first glance, I thought it's a Ferengi female because his lobes are so small. But the makeup was much better than in Discovery, and at least he sounded like a Ferengi and behaved like a Ferengi. He actually looks more like the TNG Ferengi compared to Deep Space Nine Ferengi because he has that little tattoo on the forehead which Ferengi used to have in TNG. And he has that fur coat on him. So he actually looks closer to the early Ferengi from TNG compared to the ones from Deep Space Nine. So I have no problem with the way he looks and behaves. But the scene ultimately proved to be totally pointless and useless and just filler because it didn't actually progress the story in any way except introducing Worf, I guess. Because it turns out Worf was Rafi's handler, as we all guessed, because kept talking about being a warrior and all of that, so it was kind of obvious. So he shows up to help her. So if not for that, then Rafi would have died right here and now. And another stupid thing I forgot, before she met the Ferengi, the way she met him is because her ex-husband just happens to be on the same planet, and he just happens to know the same Ferengi that she now wants to investigate, so she asks him a favor by allowing her to meet him. So all of these coincidences don't really make any sense. It's worse than, in Star Wars, people arrive on a planet and meet and land on just the right place to meet the right person. But at least in Star Wars, you had the excuse of the Force guiding people and all of that. So you can explain all of that kind of stuff away. But here it makes no sense. The Rafi just happens to be the ex-wife of the same guy that can lead her to this Ferengi that she's looking for. And then the worst dialogue ever when the father is angry at her because, she left them because of the conspiracy in season 1. She was so obsessed with the conspiracy that she was too busy with that, and that's why she abandoned her family. And so they're still angry about it, even though she was right about the conspiracy. They didn't believe her back then, but in the end of season 1, it turned out she was right, and she saved the whole galaxy in the end. So don't they know that? Why are they still angry at her when she saved their whole galaxy, including them? Because she uncovered the conspiracy. So it's like they don't know about it. They don't know that she ended up being right. They don't know that she saved the whole galaxy. And also she stands in the middle of the street and tells him, I'm with Starfleet Intelligence. With a whole bunch of people around. I made fun of that in my previous review when she did that previously, when she contacted her ship and said, Starfleet Intelligence officer reporting in while people are around her in the street. And now she does it again, telling a person with a huge amount of people around her in the middle of the street, I'm with Starfleet Intelligence. And then her husband is so angry at her, says, once again, you're looking for conspiracies everywhere and all of that, instead of trying to make contact with your son, even though he's also angry that she did try to meet her granddaughter, because she apparently ambushed her granddaughter at some clinic or something, which I remember at first I thought they were referring to the scene in season 1 when she was meeting her son with his pregnant wife when she was still pregnant, so that was also at the clinic. Also because she just happened to be on the same planet as him back in season 1. So in this new episode, her ex-husband talks about it with her and says, you ambushed them at the clinic. She says, it's because I wanted to see her. And at first I thought she wanted to see her son's wife. And they're referring to the scene in season 1, which was a few years before that. And so only now the ex-husband knew about it. So apparently no, she came there to see her granddaughter. So I'm thinking, so she did it again. She once again ambushed them at the clinic. That's the only way she can ever talk with them. She waits for them when they go to doctors, and that's when she ambushes them to see them. The father is angry about her trying to meet her granddaughter, and then later in the same conversation, he's angry that she's not trying to make contact with her family. So which one is it? What exactly are you angry about? This is just like that Romulan senator from season 1 who was angry at Picard for multiple reasons which contradict each other. So the same with Rafi's husband. And then he says, you have a choice. I will either help you contact Sneed the Ferengi, or I will put a good word for you with your son. I will not do both. You have to make a choice. And I'm thinking, what an asshole. And again, it makes no sense because she turned out to be right about the conspiracy and saved the whole galaxy in season 1. So now she's, again, trying to save people on the same planet because the terrorist attack happened on the same planet they're on, apparently. So she's trying to save lives on the same planet, and it's world-ending shit, and they're in the same city. So she's trying to save lives, which might be your own life and the life of your family, and that's somehow a problem. You're somehow angry about her trying to save your life and the life of the same son you're talking about. So why cannot you help her out? And also notice that the husband is wearing like a shirt which is like covered with paint, like he painted something, and then later when she meets the Ferengi, she talks about artists being assholes. So apparently the husband, who is a bar owner to where Sneed likes to go, is an artist. And we're supposed to know that because he was wearing a shirt which is like painted with, so he's painting with actual paint, like even though with all this new technology in the galaxy, art still means painting with actual paint, I guess. So anyway, a lot of details like that which don't make any sense. So she meets the Ferengi and she tries to pretend as if she's working for that Teluco Romulan guy who was on the news, and that's how she knows that he's not the one who did it. He gives her that drug that we saw earlier that everyone are taking through their eyes and says the way to prove that she's not in Starfleet is if she takes the drug in front of him. And she takes it, and then he starts to ask her questions. So I guess maybe he wanted her to do it because it acts like a truth serum, and yet she is able to lie anyway and keep telling the same thing she said. And he's impressed by that and says, oh, because you used to be an addict, that's why you take it so well, something like that. And then he plans to kill her, and then she stabs him through the hand, but then his guards come over to kill her and she faints. So she should have died right here and then, and I could have been fine with that if that's the end of that storyline. So Worf shows up and kills all the guards, and then kills the Ferengi by cutting his head off. But how stupid is it that the Ferengi apparently knew something important, right? Why did Rafi come to this place? Didn't she come here to get information out of him? So why did Worf just kill him when he supposedly had some important information? How stupid is that? So I guess Worf already knew everything he knew, and that's why it's not important to him. It was only important to Rafi, who didn't know that Worf knew what the Ferengi knew. But I'm guessing it's never going to be addressed. It's never going to be explained. So all of this scene was basically pointless. And also this whole scene gives me the same feeling as when I was watching season 1 of Picard, when everything was dark and nihilistic and there was no value of life to anyone and people were murdering each other without anyone even questioning it. So why did Worf basically murdered an unarmed Ferengi half his size? Isn't that kind of dishonorable? I'm remembering a scene from season 3 of Deep Space Nine in the episode House of Quark, when Quark was facing against the Klingon and said, I hope you tell your kids about the glorious event when you killed an unarmed Ferengi half your size, and then the Klingon was about to do it, and then Gowron stopped him and said, if you're willing to stand here and murder this pathetic man in this way, then you have no honor, and all of that. So I immediately thought about that scene when watching this, when Worf kills this unarmed Ferengi who had important information, and if he's a criminal who deserved it, I guess that's fine, but you can easily arrest him, right? So why don't you arrest him? Why do you execute him on the spot? So all of this once again feels kind of nihilistic, without any value of life anymore, no value of justice, not arresting criminals, just executing them on the spot like a vigilante. And just like in the season 1 episode of Picard, when Legolas saves Picard from a Romulan by cutting off that Romulan's head, which was kind of unnecessary because, you could have just cut off his hand or something like that, but no, you decided to murder him when he doesn't really have to. He could have simply knocked out that Ferengi with a phaser or something like that. They forgot that phasers have stun settings. Just like Beverly in the previous episode was vaporizing people instead of stunning them and taking them hostage. She shot them even when they were lying wounded on the floor. She came over and vaporized them. And here Worf is cutting off people's heads for no real reason. So I'm sorry, this does not feel like the TNG I grew up with, the one which taught about, the value of life, the value of justice, the value of a fair trial and stuff like that. But no, here everyone just kills everyone and it's totally okay. So Worf became his own judge, jury and executioner and is willing to execute any criminal he wants. Contrast that with that scene from, I think, season 5 of TNG, when there was that whole Klingon civil war and the Duras family was trying to take over the Klingon Empire, and in the end, after Gowron won, he gave the son of Duras to Worf to kill. And then Picard kind of looked worried, and then Worf thought about it for a few seconds and threw the knife down, and Picard looked proud and all of that. So all kinds of moments like that from TNG, in which the show had some morals. The show gave you the idea that, life is important, you cannot just kill people, there's a better way and all of that. So here we don't have any of it. Here you just kill everyone. So I'm sorry, this does not feel like a return to TNG. It feels like more of the new Trek, violent, nihilistic, dark, action-packed stuff. Of course it's really fun to see Worf beheading people and killing people. It's fun visually. They should have justified it better in the story. They should have shown that there was no other way to stop that bad guy, that he had a weapon or something. Show that he was about to shoot them, he was about to throw a grenade at them, something like that. Would have justified it, and then I would be fine with it, but they didn't bother to do that. That's what bugs me about it, that he just killed him for no reason. He was an unarmed Ferengi, half his size. So according to a scene in Deep Space Nine, according to Gowron, that would be very dishonorable. That he can stand here and kill this pathetic little man, that is kind of dishonorable, even according to Klingons. So this is supposed to be a wiser, gentler Worf who became not so violent, who is much smarter now than that, and yet he seems to be worse than the Worf we knew in TNG, because, Worf in TNG did have some mercy once in a while. That's one of the things I loved in that show, in that moment when Picard was proud of him, when he was proud of Worf not killing Duras' son. That's an example of what, in my opinion, made TNG such a good show, not just because it was good science fiction, but because it had some moral backbone, because it had some morality tales, it had some lessons to teach you and all of that. And yet here, the wiser, older, pacifist Worf is much worse than the one we saw in TNG. And also, it's stupid because if that Ferengi had some valuable information, then why not interrogate him first? Why did you kill him when he had information? Unless they explain later that Worf already knew what he knows, he knew more than that Ferengi. I guess it's possible, but I'm kind of betting they will just forget all about it and never mention it again. So that also makes that whole scene kind of pointless because it did not progress the story. And that's my biggest problem with this whole episode, that the pacing is kind of too slow. And we don't actually learn any new information about anything. We don't know anything about the bad guys, we don't know anything about the bigger plot, we don't know what they want Jack for. So what actually happened in this episode is simply they moved from one ship to the other ship. So Beverly's ship was destroyed, and they're now on the Titan. That's the whole plot of the episode. There's no new information apart from that. And we do get introduced to the big villain, which is this lady, which, again, I'm not going to repeat everything I said already. I didn't change my mind yet. I still think it's cartoony and silly. And she tractor beams Beverly's ship and throws it with the tractor beam at the Titan. And even though they raised their shields, it somehow still caused massive amount of damage somehow. So she threw the ship so fast that it broke through their shields apparently. And since when do tractor beams are even able to do that? I guess at least the characters were surprised as well. So it's some brand new technology which was not previously possible. So as long as the characters are surprised, I'm fine with it, because I'm assuming it's simply some new technology that can push ships sideways with a tractor beam. And then LaForge's daughter has a stupid line when she says something like, if my father taught me anything, is that you can break a law of physics by using a different law of physics. And I'm yelling at the screen, that's not how physics work. That line is extremely stupid. And also the villain lady says that she's lowering her shields so that they will able to scan her ship to know how many weapons she has on it. And I don't think it was ever mentioned previously that you cannot scan an enemy ship if it has shields up. And also, why not use the opportunity to shoot at her right then and then? It could end the episode, it could end the whole season right here. If they simply shot at her right away when she lowered shields, that could solve all the problems immediately. So it will make it stupid later on when you think back on it, simply because they didn't take the first shot when her shields were lowered. And also later on in this episode, when they do finally shoot at her, it was not when the shields were lowered. Why not pretend to beam Jack over so that she will lower the shields and then shoot at her? I guess Starfleet is too honorable to do that kind of thing, you know. It does tie with what I just said earlier, criticizing Worf and, you know, Starfleet being honorable and all of that, not shooting first. On the other hand, I think it would be justified if you're not, you know, blowing them up. If you're just crippling their ship, I do think it would be justified to fire first and all of that. And yet no one apparently thinks about that option even. Because, you know, if you shoot at that evil ship without shields on, I'm sure it will not destroy it immediately. It will simply weaken it or cripple it. So that's justifiable, just as using a stun setting is justifiable. And the villain lady tells them that she wants Jack Crusher because he's a criminal. And then they find out he is a criminal because he was doing so many shady things. He's basically Robin Hood. He was stealing medical supplies from some people to give it to some other people, and also dealing with weapons once in a while, as we did see in the beginning of the episode. Captain Shaw actually puts him in the brig and is inclined to give him over to that other ship because he's thinking about the good of the many. The 500 people on his ship are more important to him than saving this one criminal who the bad guys want. Which makes sense in many ways, and Picard keeps trying to convince him not to do it, because I guess he suspects it might be his son, even though it's not confirmed. I did like some of the scenes, some of the moments with Riker, when Riker mentions to Picard why is he dancing around the issue about the question if that is his son or not, and Picard tries not to speculate and all of that. There's also a funny moment when all of them were on the bridge, and one of the ensigns said something to the captain, and then Picard and Riker and Captain Shaw, they all responded with what to the ensign. That was kind of funny because it's a nice callback to scenes like that from the show when sometimes Riker was in command of the ship and then Picard came back and then someone said something to the captain and both of them responded. And here we have the same kind of scene with three captains. And we do have some kind of moral dilemma in this episode of what to do with this guy. And, you know, it reminds me of that episode Suddenly Human, when Picard has to decide what to do with that kid who the aliens adopted and they want him back, and yet he's human, so Picard wants to give him back to his family on Earth, and so that was a moral dilemma. So we have something similar here. And there's the question, would Picard fight so hard for a total stranger who was under such circumstances, or is he only doing it because it's his son? And in some ways it's funny that, you know, Picard became just like those bad admirals from TNG who often came to the Enterprise and tried to boss him around for their own selfish reasons, and often to protect criminals, and he didn't like it back then, and yet now him and Riker are doing the exact same thing to this new captain who doesn't like to be bossed around by retired admirals who came to his ship. So it's basically a reversal of what we used to see in TNG, and I don't think it's deliberate. I just found it funny that we're now seeing a reverse point of view. We're now seeing everything from the point of view of the old retired admiral who tries to boss around a younger captain who's been annoying by not submitting to him. So it's kind of funny to me that we're seeing it from the other point of view, from how we used to see things in TNG. You know, when Admiral Pressman came to the Enterprise and tried to boss around and Picard wouldn't let him, and now we see Admiral Picard trying to boss around a younger captain who doesn't like it. So to me it's ironic and funny. And there's a scene when Jack Crusher is somehow able to escape the brig using some little device, and so when they put him in the brig, they never bothered to scan him, they never bothered to make sure he doesn't have anything on him. And apparently he wants to break out because he wants to turn himself over to the bad guys to save the ship and his mother. So if that's what he wants to do, then why was he previously angry at Picard for not getting him out of this trouble? So why was he angry at them if he wants to do the same thing that he was worried about them doing? So again, doesn't really make much sense. So he goes to the transporter room because he wants to give himself over to the bad guys, and then they stop him. And then Beverly finally comes to the bridge because Riker woke her up from her coma and brought her to the bridge, and then she doesn't even have any lines. She just kind of looks at Picard with kind of a guilty look, and then Picard realizes right away that that is indeed her son, and then he takes over the bridge from that captain right away, and everyone just follows him right away. So that was also kind of jarring because in the previous episode they mentioned that he's a retired admiral, and here he says Admiral's orders, and everyone listens to him, but that doesn't really make sense. I guess because everyone knows he's a legend and all of that, it could make sense, but what should have been done, in my opinion, is have the bridge crew being conflicted between these two leaders, and then Picard giving a Picard speech and convincing them somehow to follow him and not the other way. That could have worked, just like in the end of TNG, when Picard was in the past and the crew didn't know him yet and didn't want to follow his orders because from their point of view he was behaving illogically. And then he made kind of a pep talk speech to them, and then they agreed to follow him. If they did something like that, then I can be okay with it. But here he just takes over immediately, and everyone follows him immediately, including the captain himself, who somehow immediately agrees to roll with it, to do what he wants. So that was kind of too abrupt in my opinion, but I did like that moment when he talks with the villain and has to make the final choice, and then says engage, and then they just start shooting at the bad guys and escaping into the nebula. I did like that moment because it felt as if finally Picard is back. Finally we're not seeing Patrick Stewart being led around the corridors, but instead we see Captain Picard back, someone who gives orders and taking charge, and saying engage was really perfect in that moment. So I did like that scene overall, even though I think it could have been done better. But again, it's kind of not really clever the way they did it, because why not tell to that captain, we are beaming him over, lower your shields, and then shooting at her? Then it would be more clever tactically, and maybe you can say, oh, that's dishonorable, but again, it will not destroy the bad guy. It will not be like the execution that Beverly and Worf are doing to criminals. It would be more like a stunt setting, because it will just weaken the enemy ship, which is obviously much stronger than them. So I do think it would be justifiable, and yet no one even thinks about doing that. So why not first try to trick her into lowering shields and then shooting at her? Maybe her shields were still down from before, I'm not sure. And then they just escape into the nebula, and she kind of laughs at all of it because that's kind of what she wanted. She wants to play a game of cat and mouse with them in the nebula, I guess. And so that's where the episode ends. They just fly into the nebula, she's chasing them into the nebula. I guess if it's done well, it might be fun, but there's, again, no real story here yet. It's all just filler, it will all be just action-packed episode, but will there be an actual story? I guess we'll have some drama between characters, the whole relationship thing with Beverly and Picard and their son. Might be good if it's done well, but there is no real science fiction story, there is no real moral dilemma here, there is no real intellectual topics to debate here. So it's all relationship stuff, and it's all just a fight in the nebula against the crazy evil lady who wants Jack for some unexplained reason. So it's all still a mystery box. We don't yet have any new information. We don't yet know anything about the bigger plot. How will that connect with the terrorist attack? Is the secret weapon that her ship had is the same portal weapon that we saw being used? I guess we'll wait and see. So I'm not really optimistic about this season anymore because of all these inconsistent, illogical points I raised. It shows me that the writing is not really that good, unfortunately. That's all my opinion. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.